The question is not agreed by majority of the two groups of members present. I declare the motion negatived. Second motion. Motion by Mr. Kenneth Leung to summons the Commissioner of Police to attend before the Council on the 24th of January and 31st of January 2018 to testify and produce relevant documents. Members who wish to speak, please press the request to speak button. I now invite Mr. Leung to speak and move his motion. Mr. Kenneth Leung. President, I move the motion as printed on the agenda. I would like to declare that between 2010 and 16, I was a member of the IPCC. The motion is made pursuant to Article 73 brackets 5 and 73 brackets 10 of the Basic Law of the Hong Kong SAR of the People's Republic of China. They are interfering. Please switch off the sound emitting device. Could the Secretariat please help remove that device? The motion is made pursuant to Article 73 brackets 5 and 73 brackets 10 of the Basic Law. These articles empower LegCo to ask questions of the administration's work, and if necessary, public officers could be summoned to testify and produce evidence. And the motion summons the Commissioner of Police to attend before the Council on the 24th of January and 31st of January 2018 to testify in relation to the police's purchase of vehicles equipped with water cannon for operational purposes and to produce all relevant papers in respect of the following matters, including the performance of the vehicles equipped with water cannon purchased by the police, the force of the stream of water shot from the water cannons installed on the vehicles purchased by police and its impact on human body, and 3, the guidelines and precautions on the use of the vehicles equipped with water cannon. In the previous term of LegCo, in the 2015 to 16 budget, the police intended to purchase 3 special crowd control vehicles, or what we call water cannons. For each water cannon, since the cost was under 10 million, the cost was actually $9 million. So 3 water cannons would cost 27 million. If the 3 cannons are bunched as a single item, they would have to be discussed at the Finance Committee. But now they are purchasing each of 3 water cannons separately, and each would fall below $10 million. So it was incorporated into the 2015 to 16 budget. So with the grouped items at the Finance Committee, many members have ignored this item. There was a discussion at the panel on security on water cannons, and it was also discussed internally at the IPCC. But as for information requested by the public or media, the police did not provide them, and a lot of NGOs had to work very hard to secure basic information on these water cannons. Such information is important because it safeguards the basic rights of the people in protests and rallies. And the public has the right to know the basic information of water cannons. And this is a form of safeguard for both the public and enforcement officers. When the police explained why they had to purchase water cannons. And one claim was that by using water cannons, they can keep a specific distance with the public, and they can avoid physical contact. So that was cited as one of the reasons for purchasing water cannons. And some members of the public have great reservations towards the purchase of such water cannons. Of course, in countries like Korea, Germany, and Turkey, which I visited a few years ago, they might be deployed. But the geographical conditions at those countries are entirely different. As for the force of the stream of water shot from the water cannons, what is its impact on the human body? And is there anything the public or protesters have to pay attention to? The police should not think that this is something confidential. If you disclose such information, members of the public and protesters would assess the risks they face and they might consider their behavior, and this would be a win-win situation for all. Such information is not confidential at all, and in other parliaments, the public would be given such information. In the UK Defence and Scientific Advisory Council, for the subcommittee under this council, they provided papers to the Parliament in 2004 to provide professional advice on the use of such water cannons as non-lethal weapons. When Boris Johnson was mayor of London, he vetoed the use of water cannons in London. So it was due to it might be due to the geographical conditions of London and the possible harms on the human body. And I refer to the same paper in 2004. It has been 13 or 14 years already. But unfortunately, the police force did not provide your information, so I have to rely on overseas information. According to that paper, shots from the water cannons can have 3 serious harms on the human body. The public might think that the worst they can get is to catch a cold, but the harms include injuries to the head and neck or rotational injury to the spine. And the streams of water can also move certain objects which might then hit the human body, and that could lead to injuries or trauma. Streams of water can only lead people to fall. For example, especially those at higher spots. For example, those who stand at a higher spot might fall. So apparently the public might not know about all these information unless they do the research themselves. The paper also pointed out that water cannons could not be targeted towards any individual, even though only 1 or 2 protesters might be taking out violence, the water cannons would affect a whole group of people. And in the narrow streets of Hong Kong, the use of water cannons as a crowd control measure would lead to doubts. So I hope the Commissioner of Police can attend before the Council and tell us about how they are deployed. Would you only use them in squares, parks, or if you use them in very narrow alleys or streets? The water cannons can move certain objects, and these objects can lead to serious injuries. When we look at cases of the use of water cannons elsewhere, in Germany, water cannons had lead to blindness for the people, and in 2015, protesters in South Korea were hit in the head, and the protester was hurt, and 10 months later, the protester died from his injuries. And the streams of water led to fatal injuries in the head. And the police allegedly breached the operation guidelines of water cannon. And 2 years later, these 4 police officers, including the head of the Seoul unit, he was guilty of negligent homicide. I want to point out that water cannons are not common equipment for crowd control, and in certain situations they can be a fatal weapon. I want to see more information because a lot of people might feel that they will only get wet, or they might feel a bit cold. So this is a grave misunderstanding. So I hope the Commissioner of Police can attend before the Council and answer these basic questions. When you look at my motion, I'm only asking for very basic information. Water cannons are used as weapons by the police to manage protests or gatherings, so the public certainly has the right to know more about these water cannons to assess the risks they might face in joining protests or rallies. At the panel on security and in closed-door meetings of the IPCC, well, I did ask such questions, but the police did not provide such information. And from this motion, you can see that I'm making 3 very basic requests based on facts. I don't see any reason for pro-establishment members or other members to vote down this motion. The public's right to know is certainly essential. Thank you.
I now put the question to you, and that is that the motion moved by Mr. Kenneth Leung be passed. Secretary for Security.
主席，警方正係採購嘅人。
Madam Deputy, about the special purpose vehicle for crowd management procured by the police is equipped with water cannons for the purpose of dealing with riots in a more effective manner, and also to manage possible breach of laws in mass rallies. The vehicles could effectively spray water on the crowds so as to disperse them, to avoid conflicts and bodily contact, and minimize injuries to police officers. And there is also another option of conducting operations by the police. The police is now procuring 3 vehicles equipped with water cannon for a special purpose. There would be a loudspeaker system so that it could effectively disseminate advice, warnings, or messages of the police. The water would be dyed with a certain color to identify offenders for follow-up investigation. On top of that, tear stimulating liquid can also be used through water cannon to disperse the crowds. We estimate that the vehicles will be dispatched in the first half of this year for commission in the second half of this year. For law enforcement agencies overseas, vehicles are used regularly in crowd management and mass rallies. But in Hong Kong, indeed, it is something new, and the police is fully prepared in the procurement process. There would be strict guidelines and operation manuals to follow in operating these vehicles. All staff operating such vehicles must first receive training on the operation, driving, and other safety matters, and they must strictly abide by the relevant guidelines and manuals. The police is at the moment drawing up guidelines and training programs in relation to these special purpose vehicles for crowd management. Mr. Leung's motion is concerned about the specifications and operational guidelines of these special purpose vehicles for crowd management. I emphasize that it carries a number of functions. Warning the crowds is one function. Dispersing rioters charging forward is also another function. Mr. Leung is concerned that when using such vehicles for crowd control, whether there would be an impact on peaceful protesters joining the rally. As the Secretary responded to Dr. Ann Chang's oral question yesterday in relation to the United Nations CCPR and also the relevant conventions, there is freedom of expression. However, it must come with duties and obligations, and they should also be subject to the law. And these restrictions are imposed for the sake of protecting people's lives and maintaining law and order. And in the judgment handed down by the Court of Final Appeal, it's also mentioned yesterday that when the public's daily lives are affected, such as the means of living of taxi drivers and also students going to school are affected, then the police is responsible for maintaining order and providing protection. And that is why protesters in the rally should abide by the law and should not resort to violence. When the peace is breached, when the law is broken, the police must take action to restore order. Since reunification, the number of rallies and demonstrations have increased substantially, from about 2,300 cases in 1997 to 4 times, that is 11,800 per year. And in recent years, the rallies have become more and more violent. For example, the 79-day Occupy Central movement in 2014, and also in 2016, Mongkok riot incident at the beginning of the Chinese New Year. In the face of increasing challenges, the police have remained steadfast in their post. Appropriate measures have to be deployed with minimum force under those circumstances in order to restore law and order. In terms of crowd management and dispersal, the police has drawn up guidelines. The major principles are, for example, the special purpose vehicle for crowd management must only be deployed when it is necessary to maintain and restore order. And we have this principle is similar to that for the use of violence. And there are also fundamental principles in the use of weapons by law enforcement agencies imposed by the United Nations. The United Nations require that there should be different measures and gear provided to law enforcement officers to deal with different situations. Warnings will be issued in different situations that such vehicles will be used, and as far as practicable, the relevant persons would be given the opportunity to follow the police's directions. And where it is possible to use the vehicles with water cannons, the police would exercise the highest self-restraint. When the objective is achieved, the police would stop using the vehicle. The police is drawing up a set of guidelines on the special purpose vehicle for crowd management to make sure that it is in line with the safety standards. Madam Deputy, may I first hear from members before I respond to them? Thank you. Dr. K.K. Kwok.
主席就
Madam Deputy, I speak in support of Mr. Kenneth Leung's motion under Article 73, bracket 5 and bracket 10 of the Basic Law. That is for the administration to submit to produce reference documents, records, and so on. Now, just now I heard the Secretary said that water cannons are something straightforward, so we don't need to worry about it. And also, he mentioned that there's been many more protests since the handover. Well, that's true. Why? Why have there been many more cases? It's because Hong Kong people administering Hong Kong and high degree of economy are losing their shine. Now, for the 79-day Occupy Central, you must know, don't pretend you don't, that it's because the Central People's Government has ruled out true universal suffrage for Hong Kong. Since 1997, the NPCSC interpreted the Basic Law, and that sparks a public outrage. But every time when there was demonstration, even involving a large number of people, it's always peaceful. And for the 79-day Occupy Central movement, as referred to by the Undersecretary, this took place in Central, Admiralty, and Mong Kok. For the majority of those taking part in the movement, they stood firm by the principles of ensuring it's peaceful, law-abiding. Of course, there were some who did breach the law as a fact. We don't deny. But if the government tries to crack down further on these activities, and they even use special vehicles to suppress the people, this will not bring about more further harmony or in society. Now, if the government deploys water cannons or other strong weapons, and then you think the people will back down, don't even dream about it. And the police are not supposed to be the tool of those in power. Police is not a tool for the Central People's Government to suppress people's wish or views. Now, before 1997, we had the Royal Hong Kong Police Force, and now we have the Hong Kong Police Force, and we see that the police force becoming increasingly politicized. The last two commissioners, you must remember Zheng Wai-hong. In 2014, he was a real hawk. And 2014, on many occasions, he made speeches that's not in keeping with his capacity. For the new commissioner of police, I note that he's not as provocative as the previous commissioner. Yes, that helps to ease tension a bit, but it's not going to be the case forever. Now, if the police willingly become the tool of those in power to suppress the people, then there will be no way out for the police, and people will dislike them even more. Mr. Kenneth Leung said just now that water cannons are not just about making you wet. We've got figures, and that's why Mr. Kenneth Leung has asked the secretary or the commissioner to come to attend before the council. You know, for spending over $10 million for the procurement of weapons, usually it's supposed to go through the finance committee, but it seems that the commissioners resorted to dishonorable means. It so happens the budget was $9.99 million, just under $10 million, so they evaded scrutiny by this council. So they bought 3 water cannons. But what about the possible impact on humans? And what about guidelines? Even these guidelines not providing any additional information. But water cannons killing people, this is nothing new. In 2015, on the 14th of November in South Korea, there was some Korean peasant who tried to fight for his rights. He was hit at the head by a water cannon of the police. He died 10 months later. The operator of the water cannon and the senior management, including the commissioner of the police for Seoul, they were prosecuted for killing through neglect. Now, of course, the South Korean government is elected, and the government has to carry out fair and impartial prosecutions, even against its own staff. But in Hong Kong, there is not relevant laws to allow prosecution. And then with the new Secretary for Justice and other appointments, will the Hong Kong government act like the South Korean government to prosecute its own staff, including senior officials, if necessary? Now, I have great worry it won't happen here. The South Korean death case was not the only case. Now, you look up cases involving water cannons. Water cannons started to be used in Germany in the 1930s. You know, at that time it was the end of the First World War. You know, it was the Nazi who ruled, and then they bought a large number of water cannons. Now, most of these water cannons, although they were they're manufactured by European and American countries, mostly it's African countries and Asian countries which buy these water cannons. And it's because in most of these African and Asian countries, there's autocracy, and water cannons are the best weapon for them. So apart from the South Korean incident I mentioned, that was in November 2015, and the person died in 2016. And then in Indonesia, there was also a case in 1996. And then Zimbabwe, 2017. Another case, 2013, Turkey. Chemicals were put into the water cannons, and there was terrible effect on those hit. 2014, Ukraine, water cannon caused someone to have complications, pneumonia, and because the weather was so cold that a person died eventually. What I'm trying to say is that the government is trying to mislead the public, the police in particular, are trying to mislead the public to say that water cannons are safe weapons. London 2 years ago, the mayor bought 3 second-hand vehicles amidst opposition by the public. But then the Home Ministry would not allow the mayor to use the water cannon. They'd rather let him use rubber bullets. Well, I'm sure you know the reason why, Under Secretary. You know, of course, rubber bullets could hurt too, but at least it's more targeted towards people you want to disperse. But for water cannon, it's considered indiscriminate in the UK. So everyone is hit when you fire the water jet. What is it meant to do? Is meant to shock people, to scare people. And so they want some strong force. Now, why do I say strong force? Well, you might think the South Korean case is serious, but it's not. In Hong Kong, the new water cannons bought is reportedly 1 time more powerful than the South Korean water cannons. So if it's a distance of 10 meters, 30 feet, the force is 175 pounds. Let me use 175 pounds to hit you on your head, or your ear, or your eye. You know, this is really destructive weapon. Now, in the past, there were demonstrators, including demonstrators in Germany, whose eyes were hit by water cannons and they became blind. It happened. Now, this government doesn't perform its duty. It won't introduce a true universal suffrage. People were enraged, and that's why there was the 79-day Occupy Central Movement. Instead of reflecting on its mistakes and allowing true universal suffrage, the government bought more water cannons, trying to, keep the public in line through powerful weapons. What sort of a government is this? Do you want to be on a par with authoritarian countries in Africa? Well, you're not serious, are you? Because Hong Kong is an international city. We talk about the rule of law. We talk about abiding by the basic law. Now, in 2014, everyone came out to ask you to follow the basic law and bring in universal suffrage. So who took the lead to breach the basic law? The NPCSC made this interpretation, and there's no true universal suffrage. That's why there's the 79-day Occupy movement. You didn't ask about the reason, and you just bought more water cannons. Don't forget what you said yesterday, Secretary. Taxis, public light buses. There was a case of contempt of court, and there's an injunction. Now you go to Mong Kok, you see the PLBs are double parked every single day. Cars couldn't pass through. Has the police done anything? It's the same group of people applying for injunction. And then the government came and evict people and claiming that they just follow the law. But for PLB stops, try to collect protection money. Are you doing anything? You were a police officer yourself before. Now they're double parked every single day. Is anything being done about it?
You talked about complying with the law, and you can take out prosecutions that you wish, and you can use water cannons or batons as you wish. So isn't that already enough? You are taking the lead in contravening the laws and the basic law, and you are casually seeking interpretation or interpreting the law. So there's not much you actually need to say. You can just learn from the mainland officers. You are sidetracked, Dr. Keiko. Please come back to the motion on whether the council would summons the Commissioner of Police to produce some documents on the purchase of water cannons. The Undersecretary talked about playing by the laws. I think he's being hypocritical. If we talk about following the laws, we should follow the laws and the basic law, or else there would be more interpretation by the NPCSC, and the Secretary of Justice is taking the lead in contravening the laws, and even unauthorized structures are not a problem. The ordinary people have to follow the laws because they have no power, and if you go to the streets, you would be considered a rioter no matter what you say. If the police deems you a rioter, they can continue to hit you with a baton or attack you with a water cannon. Even if you go blind or deaf, you ask for it. Because the force lies with the police. A government or police force without democracy are akin to criminals. Thank you. Ms. Claudia Mo.
This Hong Kong government is becoming increasingly authoritarian. And so this administration is being seen as trying to load tons of brick on the opposition, the political opposition, of course. And only yesterday, we saw Joshua Wong, the top student leader, being sent back to jail, and then his colleague, Raphael Wong, had to go back to jail for 4.5 months. And so this is Hong Kong. And amidst this sort of political rifts, gaps, splits, the police would want to get what they call water cannon scare trucks. We'll try not to use it. It's mainly to sort of scare first. And if you listen to what the official had to say just now, you would think he might be describing Northern Ireland in Hong Kong. It's completely absurd. And only this afternoon, I was watching TV news. Some Beijing official media, I think People's Daily, would actually publish some article, slamming the student union of the Chinese University in Hong Kong for advocating this and that and the other. So much for one country, two systems. So if the Chinese university students wouldn't get obedient, the Hong Kong police are going to use water cannons at them. Is that the message? And yes, two other stories, and that's what fills our TV news, our headlines on a daily basis. Another top activist by the name of Edward Leung Tin K got sent to court today on riot charges. Yes, go and use shoot your water jets at Leung Tin K and the likes. Meanwhile, about that 7 police who beat up a protester, one of the police person today lodged some appeal application to make sure that they got the fair judicial treatment. So day after day after day, we hear this government using judicial means against the political opposition in Hong Kong, in particular our young. And now the police are talking about getting water cannon vehicles. which should have been delivered by late last year or early this year, meaning now. I do wonder, sorry, I wasn't listening very diligently at what you had to say just now. Have you got them already? Have you? Not yet. Or you're going to buy. Or you're still trying to bury the costs. It's what? 27 million, but split up, of course, right? Not one whole lump sum. Into this budget thingy so that you can easily bypass the Finance Committee in Hong Kong Legislative Council. Now, according to your bid documents issued out this time last year, these 3 water cannon trucks will have 15 different sized cannon jet outlets, and on top of each vehicle there would be 2 main outlets, and each can shoot out per minute 1,200 litre of water. Now, if you have no idea, if you cannot quantify this image as such or visualize this quantity, just imagine 1,200 1-litre bottle of bottled water. Just imagine. And what about the pressure? I'm no expert at physics, of course, but I can understand the following, and that is 145 pounds within a 50-meter range. 145 pounds. And it's indiscriminate, as my colleague was saying just now. It's indiscriminate, and that's why even the UK government, the Home Secretary of which, would say that they would actually prefer plastic bullets, because when you shoot a bullet, you would get a target. You would know exactly what you are trying to shoot at. But with this water thing, it's panoramic, isn't it? The thing at the top of the truck, it goes all round, 360 degrees, and you would get the scare effect. But it's so indiscriminate, so random, that you can easily commit negligent killing. This is very dangerous. The government in London actually said no. The London police are not allowed to use water cannon trucks because London is very crammed, very crowded. They're talking about London, for God's sake. In Hong Kong, go and have a look at Mong Kok, and then our Causeway Bay. How more crammed, how more crowded can you get? Ask anyone with some sense who has seen London and Hong Kong, both of these cities, and ask the person to reply, which one do you think is just more crowded? And the reply is definitely Hong Kong. And you would just go against common sense to do this and try to cheat too, being honest, trying to bury the money figures in this lump of budget spending and pretend that each of the trucks costs so little, just under the 10 million mark, wouldn't need any separate passage of the spending. I read online this rather meaningful line. Water cannons are not democratic. They are instruments of violence. Of course they are. What else can they be? You're trying to get, or to give, rather, the impression to the man in the street in Hong Kong that, oh, it's just water, that you just get wet a bit. No harm done, really, just to shoo you away, literally, shoot you away with water. It's almost like you're trying to say, it's rather like Water World, which is now defunct, at the former Ocean Park. That's not true. You know, I know. And you know, I know. You know this fact. This is just not right. Not for a highly politicized, highly strung city in Hong Kong. And can I also remind you, using water cannon trucks is a very bad PR exercise as far as the security and police departments are concerned. It's a universal almost consensus that police around the world will try, well, in civilized societies, of course, will try their best to avoid using water cannons because it's such bad publicity. It makes such bad media coverage that you're the ogres, you're the oppressors, you're the suppressors against the people. You are the war against the X on the other side. See? You're going to play very, very badly. And don't think, oh, in Hong Kong we don't get worried because the Hong Kong media have been so very domesticated. They know what to report. I'm not going to argue with you on that. But don't forget, you have to remember, there is such a thing as international media. There is such labels still as the BBC and the CNN. Of course, they still get attacked by their government, but never mind. We still believe in the fourth estate. And last but not least, water cannon trucks can cause very serious harm. We all know that. If you get hit in the eye, bye-bye to that eye of yours. And they can kill. The water can kill. Water itself, of course, it's all harmless. It's the force that comes with it. And what comes with it as well will be some chemicals. Oh, you would say, oh, there'll be no chemicals. As far as Hong Kong's concerned, when it comes to using water cannon. Government promises. Or haven't you said something like you just might mix the water with paint and you spray, you shoot it on demonstrators to make sure that you can identify them later? Gosh, it sounds very authoritarian. It's almost, well, I don't want to say autocratic, but it's just so disgusting to talk about this particular issue. I wouldn't go as far as saying that, oh, this is a weapon of mass destruction, what they used to call what's being hidden in Iraq and so on, the WMD. But if you try to be proportional with things, considering Hong Kong, its population, the political rifts, and the very antagonistic sentiment present, versus your water cannon trucks, it could be classified as WMD, weapon of mass destruction. You say, oh, well, we'll train people to use them wisely. And, of course, we realize Hong Kong has narrow streets and blah, blah, and it's just for warning protesters to just get out of the trouble zone. Oh, I wish you would give us some guideline on that and not just copying mainland officials saying, I am the law. It's the law because I say so. It is legal because I say so. This is Hong Kong. We do come under one country, two systems. If you think you're just trying to control Hong Kong in a more sufficient manner, you're very, very wrong. Because Hong Kong, after all, is not Northern Ireland. You don't have the excuse to use that sort of very dangerous weapon. And I assure you, if you send such vehicles out in the street, say along Nathan Road or Queen's Road Central, or for that matter, our tram track along the heart of Hong Kong, you will just make things worse. And I wish the police would think twice. Of course, you operate under orders, but you need to advise your superiors. You're not just their minions, that you don't just use force to suppress. You need to put on some goodwill, even you're being Machiavellian. You need to show the people that you were at least sincere while trying to keep security in Hong Kong. Hong Kong police should not be tools.
Mr. Leung. Thank you, Madam Deputy. Madam Deputy, I'm going to speak in support of Mr. Kenneth Leung's motion, but before I go on with my speaking notes, I'd like to express the following. To move a motion under Articles 73.5 and 73.10 of the Basic Law, requesting the government officials to testify and provide papers. I don't think we should have a strong stance on the matter, because we are just asking government officials to come and answer our questions and to produce papers. Simply on this point, Madam Deputy, I don't see how we should hold strong political views as to whether either party would suffer or gain from it, just like the previous motion. If we think that this should be done, we should go ahead with it. But of course, in a moment, I will explain my positions. In fact, even if this is unprecedented, it is not a reason to veto the motion. I think every member here should examine whether there are sufficient grounds to do so before making a decision. In terms of vehicles equipped with water cannon, there have been controversies. In fact, in January 2016, we already heard about the police spending $27 million to procure such vehicles because the police would like to have an additional weapon to deal with mass demonstrations and rallies. So water cannon vehicles is in effect for crowd management. And it is only just for the public to consider. As far as these vehicles with water cannons for crowd management are concerned, what is the impact on the public? Let's compare this with other options, police batons and other weapons currently equipped by the police officers, whether this is a more effective tool. The former Secretary for Security, Mr. Lee, said in 2015 on a radio program that using a water cannon vehicle to disperse the crowd would be causing less harm to the public than using police batons, because the public would most likely be slipped over or get their bodies wet. For our CV6, a water cannon vehicle produced in Turkey, the range could be up to 40 to 50 meters. According to the Human Rights Monitor, if the range is 5 meters, the impact would be 320 pounds. So the actual impact would be 280 pounds in a 10-meter distance. Even if it's lighter in weight than a police baton, it is no different than a police baton. So for the former secretary to say that this is lighter in weight than a police baton, this is absurd. And if we just do some calculations, we would know that this is definitely not lighter than a police baton. And taking this theory further, assuming that the water cannon is not shooting directly at the crowd, but rather other objects in the street, these objects may, as a result, be moved, and then it may collide and hurt people. And definitely the impact would not be less harmful than that coming from a police baton. And other members just now cited examples in other countries and in Korea. In fact, in 2010, the Trach Wagner, a German in Germany, was protesting against a works project, and his right eye got shot by the water cannon. He lost 50% of his vision. And just now, Dr. K.K. Kwok mentioned the incident in Korea. In November 2015, there was a protest in Seoul. 5 seconds. That was how long a protester got shot, and then he suffered severe injury. His mouth and his nose were bleeding, and then he died 10 months later. In these two tragic cases, the victims were respectively 68, 69 years old, rather aged protesters, and of course, they were more vulnerable towards impact from the water cannons comparing to young people. But unless the police could prove to the contrary, or perhaps unless the police provides in the guidelines that in the face of aged protesters they would not use water cannon vehicles, I'm not convinced. So I should ask them to come and answer our questions, what the guidelines are, and taking this rather bold hypothesis that they will not use water cannon vehicles towards aged protesters. How would they ascertain the age of protesters in front of them? What criteria should they adopt? It's only reasonable that they come and answer our questions. That is why we'd like to summons the police commissioner to produce papers for our benefit, so that we know those water cannon vehicles procured with public money would have what capabilities, and that what safeguards will be provided, so that our protesters in the future will not be put to such huge risk. It is just a meager and simple request. I don't see any element of politics in it. And also in Article 27 of the Basic Law, it provides that we enjoy the freedom of expression, publication, assembly, etc. How should we ensure that our freedoms enshrined in the Basic Law and be safeguarded without interference by the police, so that we have the right to assemble? And according to the basic principles endorsed by the United Nations on the use of ammunition and weapons in 2006, in the mass rallies and demonstrations, the use of violence should be kept to a minimum. So, Madam Deputy, let's assume that water cannon has to be used. How can we ensure that this is a minimum degree of force? As I said just now, I don't think that this is a decision to be made by the top official, like the former Secretary for Security. We need more concrete examples and guidelines for reassurance. And just now, after talking about the tragedies, the Korean police published clear guidelines on the use of water cannons. And yet, let me correct myself. The guidelines were published before the tragedies happened, and yet it happened anyway, let alone the fact that we do not have any guidelines at all. Madam Deputy, I do not want to have tunnel vision towards this topic in this debate, because for me it is not political, and I don't think we should politicize it. I don't want to air all our grievances here. I just want to state my arguments and, using logic, try to convince the pro-establishment camp and other members. I want to keep my speech short. I just want to talk about a revolutionist, Franz Fanon from the Caribbean. His famous quote is, "We protest not because of a certain culture. We put up resistance because of various reasons, such that we can no longer breathe smoothly." I think it is universal. It applies to all rallies and protests, including what happened 50 years ago, stirred up by the leftists, and also what happened in Hong Kong. Definitely, it has to do with oppression. It has to do with the inability to breathe smoothly in the light of present situation. And one must not exercise force to make people trust the government. The same happened 50 years ago. So, Madam Deputy, I can only say very sincerely here that if you want to prove that the water cannon vehicles is not something that people should be afraid of, and that it is only a tool for the police to enhance its capability to suppress mass rallies, I don't see why in this chamber there is any chance that Mr. Kenneth Leung's motion should be vetoed. I so submit, Madam Deputy. Mr. Ray Chan, point of order, call for quorum. Mr. Ray Chan calls for a quorum.
兼兩個，一個。請各位議員返回座位，會議繼續。請各位議員保持肅靜。陳志全議員，
梁耀忠，
唔好意思，梁耀忠議員。
主席，我係支持梁繼昌議員係根據基本法第73條。
I speak to support Mr. Kenneth Leung's motion that pursuant to Articles 73(5) and 70(10) of the Basic Law, this Council summons the Commissioner of Police to attend before the Council on the 24th of January 2018 and the 31st of January 2018 to testify in relation to the police purchase of vehicles equipped with water cannon for operational purposes and to produce all relevant papers, books, records or documents in respect of the following matters. 1. The performance of the vehicles equipped with water cannon purchased by the police. 2. The force of the stream of water shot from the water cannons installed on the vehicles and its impact on human body. And 3. The guidelines and precautions on the use of the vehicles equipped with water cannon by the police. The background of the matter is in 2015, in the fiscal year 2015, the police asked for $27 million to be earmarked for the purchase of 3 vehicles equipped with water cannon to give more options to the police in the use of force to deal with possible radical situation in future social movements. And then the application was bundled with the draft estimates. As a result, the time to scrutinize taken to scrutinize the application was greatly shortened, and there were queries that perhaps it was a move to circumvent scrutiny by the Council in the purchase of such equipment that aroused great concern because the application procedures and methodology prevented members of the Council in asking questions and examining the various proposals. The matter has yet to be resolved, and that's why Mr. Kenneth Leung has moved this motion. Mr. Andy Zhang, the CP back then, said in the public that every year the police would procure vehicles for special purposes, and the procurement of vehicles with water cannon was a special purpose vehicle. And under the finance rules of the police, when each vehicle doesn't exceed $10 million, no approval by the Council is needed. It was an inappropriate move because it was trying to abuse the loopholes in our rules. If each item doesn't exceed $10 million, no application for funding from this Council is needed. So every time when they procure anything, they can just split up the bill to no less than $10 million each so that they can circumvent our inspection.
In other words, you are trying to avoid becoming accountable to the Council and the public. This is not in order at all. And also, if you bundle this up with the budget, well, we criticize that time and again, because by doing so, you are shrinking the time for discussing the matter and also our power to monitor your operations. You are trying to pull wool over the eyes of the council and society, and you are ducking the responsibility you should take up. I express the greatest reprimand here. There is a lot of controversy attending the purchase of water cannons. Some people may say that this is the way to tackle irregularities in large-scale and protracted public protests, and also protesters who are prone to using violence can be dispersed. Apart from water cannons, these vehicles would also be equipped with broadcast equipment and also large screens, and warnings can be sent out to protesters. These are the so-called advantages cited by the police. And also, it can also spray dye so they can identify the lawbreakers. Of course, these are the so-called merits of water cannon vehicles. Mr. Andy Zhang, the then CP, said that this was to provide more choices for the police. And he heard people say that during the protests, the police could have used water cannon vehicles instead of pepper spray and batons so as to assist frontline police officers in exercising their duties. Well, it could sound quite well, couldn't it? But I think the water cannon vehicles would just add to the police's power to suppress public protests. And this could also be a way to counter the protesters. In fact, this could become a kind of white terror. What is the effect of spraying dye on protesters? It would, of course, be able to help you to identify all people on the ground, and you could arrest as many as you want. I don't think that is proper. This will lead to an abuse of power, and I can't agree with that. And those who support it would say these vehicles could help disperse the crowds, and there could be the creation of a safe distance between the police and protesters so as to minimize injuries. And compared to tear gas and batons, water cannon vehicles will not be as dangerous. And in a way, you could just have the vehicles put there, and as long as protesters do not provoke and abide by the law, the vehicles can just stay there, just in case. But very often, protesters charge or provoke the police. It is often because of the action of the police. The police should also watch that they do not provoke the protesters. Madam Deputy, we cannot overlook the strength of water cannons. As our members have said, within 10 meters, people could still lose their balance and drop to the ground. And the strength can very possibly make people fall to the ground, and then you can also be pushed against certain hard objects. The water cannons can be aimed at hard objects so as to make them fall and hurt people. This can do a lot of harm. Hong Kong roads are narrow. There are always crowds. Water cannon vehicles may cause objects in the streets to fly around, and this can be very harmful. Some people say, compared to tear gas, there could be more chaos caused. And since our streets are narrow, the distance used would be comparatively short, and there would be serious injury done to the human body as a result. As members have cited, when water cannon vehicles were used in other countries, protesters were injured and there were deaths. As members have said, in 2008 in South Korea, there was the protest against the import of meat from the U.S. A protester suffered from permanent blindness and another suffered from punctured eardrums. And then in 2015, after the using of water cannons, farmers were heavily injured. He was in a coma for 250 days in hospital and eventually he died. Dr. K.K. Kwok said that the policemen were prosecuted, but does it help? Even if they were convicted, does it help? Someone died. How can we compensate for human lives? How can we make good the death of a person? Even if you penalize policemen who abuse the use of water cannons, you are not going to be able to do any good to those who are injured. The Hong Kong version of water cannon vehicles compared to those in Seoul, they are quite different. The Hong Kong version is such that the storage capacity and the jet capacity, they are higher than the Seoul version. As members have said, engineers have estimated that if it is a direct jet of water at 10 meters, it can reach 175 pounds. In Seoul, it is only 100 pounds of strength at a distance of 10 meters. Mr. Ding Nam Kyo, a retired mathematics professor at the University of Hong Kong, did some calculations. He said if such a strong jet of water was directed at a person and this person could faint immediately if it was directed at his head, and his neck would break immediately, and the soft tissues, including eyeballs, could be easily injured. And if you compare with Seoul, people were killed in Seoul, the situation will just be more serious in Hong Kong because the strength of our water cannon vehicles is going to be higher. In Seoul, the assembly took place on open ground, and it was a big lawn. So it's very different from Hong Kong. Very often, people gather on carriageways, narrow strips of land. If water jets are directed at the crowds, I'm sure serious consequences will come to pass. In 2015, there was a statement in Britain saying that they understood that water cannons could cause serious injury if they are directed at the mouth, the nose, and ears. There could be permanent injury caused. And after being hit by water jets, people can bump against hard objects, causing injury. In Hong Kong, we have Mills barriers, and there are all the shops on our streets. So injuries can be easily caused. In 2016, the UN, in the special report of peaceful assemblies, it is said that water cannons can cause serious harm, and very often crowds will see it as a kind of attack by law enforcement agencies, and tensions will rise. Therefore, it is not reasonable to say that water cannons can prevent crowds from gathering. And the Amnesty International said that the basic principle for using weapons is such that law enforcement agencies should avoid using force. Even if they need to use force, they must comply with the principle of proportionality and necessity. In dispersing non-violent gatherings, there should be the avoidance of using force. If force is to be used, it must be used at a minimum. Madam Deputy, many international organizations are saying that we should best not use water cannons. Even if you have to use it, you have to comply with guidelines. But even now, we cannot see any guidelines. We don't know how water cannons are to be used. I believe this motion is very useful. You should come up with the guidelines for use and also who can use water cannons for the knowledge of the public. You should also consult the public. Mr. Junius Ho. Madam Deputy, is it better to use water cannons than cannons? You want people to use machine guns? These who are Pan-Democratic United Front are saying they need information. I would say, what do you want? So what if we show it to you or not show it to you? These useless councillors are telling lies all the time. They say they are working for the good of Hong Kong, but they're always inciting the public to take to the streets. They say Occupy Central, Occupy Mong Kok, or even Occupy Baptist University. Did they do anything to tell the public to be law-abiding? Hong Kong is the world city in Asia. We are lagging behind Western advanced countries by 40 years because still we do not have water cannon vehicles. Now the CP has decided to buy a few. So if anything should happen, he can use the water cannons instead of cannons. They would, of course, go for the best model, right? As we can see, sometimes our councillors can be rude. They sometimes are prone to violence. They might want to try out a water cannon here. Dr. K.K. Kwok is quite shameless, and he resorts to such statements in debates. Maybe we should use a water cannon on him so he can be cooled. Mr. Ted Hui usually attacks our security guards, and he should be treated with a water cannon so he can cool down. Let's look at this motion. It says to require the CP to let us know the performance of the vehicles. And Mr. Leung Yu-chung says our water cannon vehicles would be more powerful than those in South Korea. Of course, we should go for the vehicles with highest power. Or else, why should we go for them? Why don't we just use water guns?
How else can we use it to handle you? And you ask about the force of the stream of water. Of course, it's going to be stronger than the water jets from your jacuzzi. Of course, it would have some effect on your body. At least you get wet. If it's in winter, you feel cold. In summer, you may find this quite refreshing. And number 3, the guidelines and precaution on the use of vehicles equipped with water cannon. Well, they have to fill it with water first. Otherwise, how can they have any water of course, when they use it, they have to aim. If we see Mr. Chan Chi-chin there, well, they'll aim directly and at him. Of course, they won't aim at the roadside. You're not washing the street. You should aim at the protesters, and afterwards, you should ask whether they need a soup or some shampoo. I have answered you. You want the guidelines? We talk to these useless electrical members. They won't talk to you. Then they ask nonsense questions here. And if you don't know what to do, you cannot talk to them seriously. Well, I've been taught a lesson. I should be more humorous, because if they want to spend time on such frivolous matters, we should try to respond by speaking humorously. Whether I'm humorous or not is a question of perspective, but my constituents would like me to do the practical things. And if we have to spend 4 or 5 hours on such frivolous matters, well, maybe we should try to answer these questions ourselves. With these remarks, I disagree. I oppose to Mr. Kenneth Leung's motion. Mr. Chan Chi-chin. Thank you, President. I thank Mr. Kenneth Leung for moving this motion, asking the government, the Commissioner of Police, to, with respect of the purchase of vehicle equipped with water cannon, come to this council to give some accounts of certain matters. This morning, the pro-establishment camp voted in favor of the adjournment motion moved by Mr. Chan Ha-ken. Now, they should regret this. And Mr. Julius Ho is speaking as if he's doing a stand-up comedy. He says if the water cannon is to be used and the target is Mr. Chan Chi-chin, of course, they should take aim at Mr. Chan Chi-chin. I hope the pro-establishment camp members would not support this rather out of the way approach adopted by Mr. Julius Ho. Well, I'm going to promote this for you, Mr. Ho. I'm going to upload a clip of your speech later. Through a bundled application, the police purchased 3 vehicles equipped with water cannons, and they will be shipped to Hong Kong this year, and they will be used on protesters. This is a fait accompli. However we debate about this, it cannot be changed. What we want is that the government should clearly explain the performance of these vehicles and the guidelines applicable. This council and the general public have a right to know. The former Deputy Commissioner of Police, Mr. Wong Chi-hung, admitted that the purchase was prompted by the peaceful occupation movement. The former commissioner, Mr. Andy Chan, said that under normal circumstances, water cannon vehicles will not cause serious injury. It's not as if described by the Mr. Julius Ho that you get wet and you can wash yourself with soup or. Well, in other countries, water cannon vehicles did cause casualties, including fatalities. But of course, the government said water cannon vehicles will not cause serious injury. There's a wide discrepancy between what they said and what we know. According to the tender spec, the pressure is 1,000 PA, and the range is 15 meters. 1,200 liters of water can be shot, and they can also use foam or dyed water so that the protester can be identified afterwards. According to engineers' estimation, if the force is 100 pounds, 145 pounds, the protesters hit with this will fall to the ground. If the head pumps against the ground, there can be serious injury. If the water hits the eyes, the eyeball may be totally ruined. We are not making a joke. We're talking about the injuries caused by protesters, which I call peaceful demonstrators. You think they are not peaceful, and even if they are aggressive, should they be subject to such a strong oppression force? If a tear gas is mixed in the water, it can lead to inflammation. If the water gets into the nostrils, you can get choke. There should be two principles. When water cannon vehicles are used. For example, you have to respect human rights. The use of force should be reasonable and proportionate. If Julius Ho is the commissioner of police, of course he would ask for cannons to be purchased, not water cannon vehicles. Fortunately, he is not the commissioner, and he can only brag about what he can do in his rally. Even when force is to be used, it should be kept to the minimum. If the protesters are just arguing verbally, the government should not use the baton or other more lethal weapons. This is just common sense. The background of this purchase of water cannon vehicles was the occupation movement. Although at the later stage, there was some violence involved, but the most they did was to try to protect themselves with umbrellas against pepper spray. And there are elderly people as well as young people in that movement. If they are injured by the water cannon vehicles, there would be no remedy, and it's not proportionate. It can even be lethal. In South Korea, farmers who protested got shot at the head. The victim went into a coma for more than 200 days and subsequently died from renal failure. The South Korean police failed to adhere to comply with the guidelines, and 4 police officers were prosecuted, including the commissioner, who was prosecuted for manslaughter. It's not like Mr. Julius Ho has said that, well, it's just some water. The South Korean government then published the guidelines for the use of water cannon. And the court knew about the police action, that at a distance of 7 to 8 meters, the police shot a water jet at a distance of 6 to 7 meters, and the rate was 2,500 RPM. The relevant guidelines and precautions are said to be involved in police planning and operation, and therefore the police do not want to tell us more. In the UK and South Korea, such guidelines are made available to all, so that we know when the water cannon will be used and what measures will be adopted to protect the safety of protesters, including the strength of the water jet and the body parts where the water jet can be directed so that we will not cause unnecessary injury. Not every pro-establishment member would act like Mr. Junius Ho. The former chairman of the security panel, Mr. Yip Kok Him, told the press that police had promised to give an account to this council on how to operate, how the water cannons will be operated. And now the government has gone back on its word, saying that the guidelines are related to police operation. Therefore, they would not like to explain what they are. There are different models of water cannon. There are the smart people in the community. Very quickly, they would be able to know the performance, the power of such water cannon vehicles. And if other countries have similar models, then we can look at their operation guidelines. It's not that difficult. Easily, some community organizations have been able to dig up some medical literature on the likely harm that can be caused. Actually, there's no need for Mr. Kenneth LEUNG to move this motion. The government should take the initiative to tell us what the guidelines and precautions are like. I just don't think that this is related to security measures. We should let people know what will be done by the police when using water cannon vehicles. Of course, the media would monitor the operations carried out by the police. For example, if there's a minimum distance required between the vehicle and the protesters, then the media would make sure that it's the case. We have many, when the police had employed a muse barrier and railing, and if then a water cannon is used against protesters, they may pump into such a muse barrier, causing serious injury. And then we may have young people, children, or elderly people, or disabled people in such protests. They will be even more vulnerable. When there are protests, there are always reporters who are doing their duties at the front line, because they have their jobs to do. I was hit by a pepper spray on one occasion in 2013 when we reached the Bank of China building. The police tried to stop us from moving, and then the reporters surged to report the standoff, and then the pepper spray was used on those reporters. I was some 7 rows behind, and I was also hit. Pepper sprays is something that you cannot use to aim at a target. It doesn't make a difference whether you are a bystander or a reporter. You get hit. So when you use such devices, you should make sure that the safety of reporters should be ensured. The media are concerned about this. Therefore, the police should tell us what the guidelines are for the benefit of the general public and media organizations. What is more disconcerting is that the police are reluctant to let us know the guidelines when there are medium-sized or large-scale demonstrations which may be peaceful. But as Mr. Junius Ho has said, these vehicles are purchased to frighten people.
So they may use it indiscriminately. So whatever few vehicles with water cannons will be on standby. Do you know that these so-called measures to intimidate
protesters can be viewed as a provocation. You may think that by the time you need it and it is deployed from the police headquarters, it is too late. That may be your view. But from protesters' point of view, too many railings, Mills Barrier is already a provocation, is a peaceful demonstration, but we have seen even 9-10 layers of Mills Barrier. So this is very much an interactive process. When police is equipped with in proportionately heavy accoutrement, the other side may see it as a provocative move. So when will vehicles with water cannon be deployed on standby at the scene of the rally? Will it be dependent on the number of estimated protesters, or will it be at the discretion of the commander? Well, if it is a rally to oppose the SJ, perhaps vehicles should be parked there. I understand that it's challenging for the police to enforce the law, but if we asked to take a look at the guidelines and precautions, it is not going to do much harm to your ability to enforce the law. So can we be given guidelines and precautions on when such vehicles will be used so as not to cause unnecessary panic and concern on the part of the protesters? So I agree with Mr. Kenneth Leung's motion to summons the Commissioner of Police to attend before this council to produce documents on the use of such vehicles, because we don't want you to provoke protesters into escalated action and then you justify your use of water cannon. Mr. Holden Chow. Thank you, President. I speak to oppose Mr. Kenneth Leung's motion. I oppose summoning the CP to attend our council meeting to answer members' questions. The reasons being, now, this is a matter of procedures. Members from the pro-democratic camp have told us their reservations and concerns about the use of vehicles with water cannon. I understand that from the perspective of protesters, you want to ensure that the police use force reasonably to disperse the crowd. I can appreciate their concern on this matter. I want to point out that now, if they would like to understand more about the details of vehicles with water cannon, perhaps they can do so on other occasions. For instance, if previous explanation was not clear enough, then they can make use of the security panel to include a discussion item on this. And then they can also ask an oral or written question at a council sitting. Mr. Kenneth Leung's motion has focused on a few areas. On the first, the use of the water cannon and also the strength of the stream of water shots from the water cannons. I do understand their concerns over the use of water cannon, but I think they can pursue this matter at other venues, such as the security panel. It is not necessary to summons the CP to give an account at a council sitting. If the CP is asked to answer members' questions for this matter, I think this is really much ado about nothing. There are other ways and means to ask the CP to answer our queries. And the second point in the motion is about the use of vehicles with water cannon. I have my own views. Members from the pan-democratic camp were rather lopsided. They told us about their worry of possible safety concerns to protesters. But do allow me to take the other side of the story. Since the illegal Occupy movement, we've seen how radical protests have escalated. For instance, in the Mong Kok riots, they even hurled bricks. So when the police are tasked to maintain order in rallies and demonstrations, they have to exercise physical and mental strength, that they have to be very self-restrained, and they may also risk their personal safety. So we have to consider this. Of course, we want to ensure or make sure that protesters will not be hurt as far as possible. But then we have to take care of the personal safety of police officers deployed to maintain orders as well, because they also face the risk of personal injury and even risk threats to their life. When dealing with mass rallies and demonstrations, well, we have seen the illegal Occupy movement and also the Mong Kok riots, and we can see how difficult it has been for the police. In mass rallies and protests, we've seen protesters using very sharp umbrellas to attack the police, and also sharp poles, and some may use hard objects to attack the police. They may charge the news barriers. So if the police and the demonstrators are very near to one another, there is a high risk of injuries, not just to the protesters, but on the part of the police as well. So I can understand why water cannons are deployed. Now, I can only check Google to enhance my understanding of water cannon. I understand that one of the reasons why water cannon is used is to ensure safe distance between the police and protesters, so that the two will not have to be at loggerheads at such a close distance. Well, if the other side are using hard objects and long poles, and if they push the news barriers, then it's not just the police, even the protesters can get hurt inadvertently. Now, when it comes to the use of vehicles with water cannon, and in Western countries, water cannons are also used to deal with mass rallies and rather violent protests. And I think water cannon vehicles have been used in Western countries for a long time. We are already rather late in the introduction of water cannon vehicles. We can certainly learn from Western experience and be more careful in the use of water cannons. Now, if accidents have happened overseas in the use of water cannon vehicles, we should learn a lesson from these incidents and be more careful in the use of such vehicles here. As I said, as I've stressed time and again, there are justifications for the use of water cannon vehicles. If not for the illegal Occupy movement and the Mong Kok riots, if not for those large-scale rallies, if protesters had not used sharp and hard objects causing injuries and deaths, if we had not seen how police could get hurt by bricks hurled from the other side, I believe the police would not have so lightly decided to buy water cannon vehicles. I think it is all because of change of times and also the development of things in Hong Kong. And the police have already procured vehicles with water cannon in Hong Kong. There's already a fact. And the second consideration is how such vehicles can be used. I hope members can understand the background and the context of things. If we indeed do not have a thorough understanding in the use of water cannon vehicles, if we would like to seek more information, I do understand the reasons for your request. Still, I think we can certainly pursue this subject on other occasions, including question time in the council and security panel meetings, so on and so forth, so that our queries can be answered to address the concern of the public. However, I don't agree that the CP should be summoned to the council for a special meeting, giving an account of the whole thing to us. Let me reiterate once again that we should arrange the agenda and work of this council carefully. If we spend time on such matters, then on the other side we will lose valuable time to deal with important matters. We have 6 motions on summons of government officials to the council. I believe Democrats objectively would like to use these motions to stall the progress of the council. But I'd like to put on record that the work plan of the council should show the public our priorities. We cannot accede to such requests so easily. We should not lightly summon government officials to explain things to us, because in so doing we will not have enough time to attend to other important matters. Therefore, I speak to oppose Mr. Kenneth Leung's motion to summon the CP to the council to give an account of the matter. Thank you. Mr. Jeffrey Lam, Chairman, President, I speak to oppose Mr. Kenneth Leung's motion to summon the CP to attend before the council to explain to us details related to the purchase of vehicles with water cannon. I don't think it is necessary. Hong Kong is a safe and one of the safest cities in the world. We have a very low crime rate. We have excellent law and order, thanks to the efforts of the police. However, we have seen rifts in society, and after the Occupy movement, the discipline services faced more challenges. In early 2016, there were the riots in Mong Kok. The police, which thrown bricks and stones by the protesters. They were subject to all sorts of attacks, and from what we could see from the TV, the police had been very restrained. They have been rather passive, and sometimes they've been too passive and self-restrained, and they have made themselves very vulnerable to the other side. People in Hong Kong like to talk about love and peace and Western democratic ideas, but rarely do they mention how Western countries enforce law and order in massive rallies and protests. From what we can see on the TV, Western law enforcement agencies may use their baton and pepper spray and also rubber bullets in tackling protesters, but they never accuse the other side of abusing the power or being too violent.
On the contrary, the police of Hong Kong have always been very restrained. They follow very strict guidelines, and in recent protests and marches, frontline and force of enforcement police officers were deliberately provoked by protesters, and they were abused or verbally, and it was becoming more difficult for them to enforce the law. As to what measures should be taken against the protesters, very often they would first use loud hailers to appeal to protesters. They would also hoist flags as warnings first. Many members of the public and the discipline services think that the police must have enough power and the necessary force and equipment in order to enforce the law. With regard to violent resistance and also provocation, these must be controlled in order to maintain the dignity of the discipline services so they can continue to serve the public. Somebody said if a brick hurts the policeman seriously, and even if the policeman dies, still they say it is a peaceful protest. How can that be? And also this is not supported by people in the community. Mr. Eddie Chu. Mr. Eddie Chu. President, I'd like to ask Mr. Jeffrey Lam to clarify. He said that if a brick almost kills a policeman, and some people say it is still a peaceful protest, who is he talking about? Mr. Lam, would you like to clarify? It's your decision. Please continue. These people are reprimanded by society, but they do not admit their mistakes. What kind of attitude is that? They can actually make use of the fact that the police are buying water cannon vehicles to scare the public, and then they can use public opinion to undermine the authority of the police. In social media, there are troublemakers talking about the strength and the weaknesses of water cannon vehicles, teaching people how to attack and destroy water cannon vehicles. We must stay alert to such behavior, and we should not make known too much information about the police's equipment so as not to allow the protesters to make use of the loopholes. Everybody should work together to protect law and order in Hong Kong, but there are radicals who are deliberately breaking law and order, and they're inciting the public to oppose the police. We must use better IT to gather evidence and intelligence to protect the public, so Hong Kong people can live and work safely in Hong Kong. I so speak, I object to the motion. Mr. Eddie Chu. Thank you, President. Just now I asked Mr. Jeffrey Lam to clarify because he said that there were people who said that even if protesters threw bricks, it was still a peaceful protest. I believe no one ever said that. Ask the people here. Well, the people who throw bricks won't call it a peaceful protest, Mr. Jeffrey Lam. Please don't say something like that. It is very misleading. President, on Mr. Kenneth Leung's motion, I listened to the views of a few pro-establishment camp members. I think you don't understand where this motion comes from. Many councillors said that this was a necessity because people used weapons and they threw bricks. That's why we need water cannon vehicles. First, the vehicles have been purchased. They are here. We are not talking about whether we should buy them. When the administration submitted the budget for the water cannon vehicles as part of the budget. Many members already asked whether we should buy them, but since this was bundled together, it was permitted and we could not single it out for discussion at the Finance Committee. So now we are not talking about whether we should purchase those vehicles. Secondly, President, many members mentioned that, look, this is how the water cannon vehicles should be used. They should charge the people. In winter, it would be a little cold. In summer, you would welcome it. But we have to ask this question, President. Look at the motion from Mr. Kenneth Leung and the information he is asking for. Is it that meaningless? First, he wants to know the performance of the vehicles purchased by the police to the force of the stream of water installed on the vehicles and its impact on the human body, and 3, the guidelines and precautions on the use of such vehicles. Is it so meaningless for us to ask for such information? When water cannon vehicles would become another weapon for the police and they can hurt people, the public and the council ask the police for such information. Would it be that meaningless and pathetic and unnecessary? Or is it like what the police said, that since has to do with the details of the strategies and operation of the police, so it has to be kept secret? Well, I fail to understand such logic. Mr. Hon Chow said care could be exercised when using these vehicles. I don't even know the model, the requirements for use, the performance, and when they can be used and when they cannot be used. All these are available. So what are you talking about by saying you should exercise care? It's very vague. Mr. Junius Ho was as vague. There are very detailed power and strength and how they should be used, and also the direction the water cannons should point to. It's just like the use of firearms. You can't say just exercise care or you would just get wet, and if I give you a piece of soap, you can have a bath. How can you say that and dismiss the requirements of Mr. Kenneth Leung, and also to say that it is quite unreasonable? Because what you say is unreasonable. In fact, the motion itself is quite specific and reasonable. But you are going to fail. Number 3, Mr. Hon Chow said this, and he does it every time. He says you can resort to other avenues. You can ask questions through other avenues. The Security Bureau, please be fair. I personally asked a written question about the budget, and I know Mr. James To repeatedly requested for papers to be submitted to the security panel, and in the end we got just one line. I quote, "The Secretary for Security answered my question," he said. Special purpose vehicle for crowd management is still being produced. In due course, the police department will provide operational training for the staff. Mr. Hon Chow, I was not asking about this. I was asking for information as in the motion of Mr. Kenneth Leung, but I don't know what kind of a reply that was. you have to be fair to us. We have exhausted all available channels to seek an understanding into such information, which is quite a reasonable thing to do, but we did not get anything, and that is why we ended up here, Mr. President, that we resort to Article 73, bracket 10 of the Basic Law, so as to seek the information. Frankly, if the pro-establishment camp say it's a waste of time to summons the CP here, I cannot bargain on behalf of Mr. Kenneth Leung, but if you agree that if they can provide papers, books, records, or documents with regard to the 3 requests, then we can take those to the security panel for discussion. And we don't have to discuss here in Council. That is fair, right? We are using this avenue to obtain information we should have. So we can do what you say we should do and not waste the time of the Council. I accept it, but would you accept it? President, somebody asked, why do you want the guidelines? And then it turns into the statement that the police are in danger, they risk their lives to enforce the law. President, again, we are not seeing eye to eye. Why do we want the information? First, the vehicles have been purchased. And some councillors said there was violence, so the vehicles had to be used. This motion by Mr. Kenneth Leung is not about whether the water cannon vehicles can be used. You have already purchased the vehicles, even if we said no. And also, it is within your power to use the vehicles. We cannot stop you from doing it. And why do we have this motion? It is because when they use those vehicles, we have to allow the public, the media, and the council to know beforehand, to know in advance what guidelines would attend to the use of such vehicles and how the police will be regulated. We have given consideration to the police in wording this motion. Why? Members mentioned the example in South Korea. That is a case in point. In that example, police officers contravened the guidelines for using water cannon vehicles. Causing a person to die, and the police officers had to face criminal liability. The pro-establishment camp would of course say, well, all the more I should not give you the guidelines, because if you know how I should be regulated, then you would say I contravene the regulations, and then you can use that to sue me or prosecute me for homicide. But you can look at it the other way. After we know how you are regulated, and if that is made public, then as a police officer, I will know how I should use the vehicle. And because I know it, I know the guidelines have been made public and everybody knows them, all the more I should act according to the guidelines when I use such vehicles.
And the end result is that it's good for everyone. It's good for members of the public. They know that the police action is regulated, but it's not a killing weapon. And the police know that the rules and regulations are clear and are known, and therefore they have to comply with the regulations, and they protect themselves as well. It's not just protection against harm, but protection against likely criminal liability. We don't want that. Whether we're talking about the 7 police officers and Mr. Chu King-wai, the former superintendent, if you have clear rules and regulations on the use of batons or firearms, then you know what you should not do. Otherwise, you may be penalized. It's always best to have rules and regulations that everyone knows instead of hiding them. I hope the public will understand this, because according to some members, we are wasting time. We have 8 motions, all about summoning certain officials. I hope the government will understand our rules of procedure. There are a particular way to order to put our business items, whether it's a government motion, subsidiary legislation, or motions sponsored by members, will always be put ahead of these motions on the agenda. If you think our main duty is to legislate and to approve funding applications, we're still doing that. So don't just don't talk about nonsense. Don't tell people unreasoned arguments. Don't put forth unreasoned arguments. We have clear rules. We have clear justifications. We're not saying that you cannot purchase the water cannon vehicles. You have already purchased them. We're just trying to ask you to let people know that how the use is going to be regulated. I don't know. Therefore, I don't understand why anyone should oppose to this motion moved by Mr. Kenneth LEUNG, whichever camp you belong to. In recent years, we have many serious cases of social unrest, including riots, the 79-day occupation movement, the riot in Mongkok, were all sad memories for us. The police officers in handling such protests acted professionally with constraint. We can see from the TV news coverage that many a time the police officers were insulted by protesters, and there were cases where protesters with weapons are in direct confrontation with police officers also with weapons, and there were people spraying dirty liquid on police officers, and there are people provoking police officers. Therefore, the police officers were forced to use some weapons, leading to injuries on both sides. And regrettably, because of what happened when police officers carry out the duty, some officers were even convicted and imprisoned. The police want to use the water cannon vehicles so that protesters and police officers will be kept apart for a safe distance. In the UK and France, very earlier on, started to employ similar vehicles in an attempt to prevent protests from getting out of hand and to maintain law and order. The police in Hong Kong should have been equipped with such vehicles a long time ago. It's already late. Now we are doing this. No police force in the world can effectively disperse violent crowds which are minded at ramping at the police defense line without proper equipment. The government has been saying that they would like to have the police force with good morale, so they would provide the necessary resources and manpower. Yes, we have seen an increase in police manpower, but they need to be properly equipped. Apart from manpower, proper equipment should be given to the police force. If the government knew this and purchased water cannon vehicles 4 or 5 years ago, I believe the violence in the 79-day occupation movement would be much less violent, and the police officer will not be subject to such violence or get injured. I support the purchase of the water cannon vehicles, and I oppose to this motion. Does any other member wish to speak? Mr. Chan can. Thank you, President. Mr. Kenneth LEUNG invokes Articles 73.5 and 73.10 of the Basic Law and attempts to summon the Commissioner of Police to attend this council to testify by moving this motion. I've heard the speeches of many members. I can understand why Mr. Kenneth LEUNG wants to summon the Commissioner of Police by invoking Articles 73, 5 and 10. It's not going to be meaningful if the Commissioner is summoned. Judging from the contents of the motion, you can ask an oral question in this council. It would be better for the answer to be given by the Secretary for Security. And as some members have put it, they just want to know about the performance, the force of stream of water shot, its impact on human body, and also the guidelines on the use of such vehicles. All these are simple and straightforward information. You can ask a question, oral question, or question requiring a written reply. And if it's considered that the Secretary for Security is not senior enough, the same questions can be raised in the CE's question time. The CE has promised to come every 2 months, and there will be short questions asked and short answers given. There's no need to invoke Article 73 to summon the Commissioner of Police. In the last motion, again, it's about invoking Article 73 to summon the Commissioner and the Assistant Commissioner of Correctional Services. If that's the case, that there's no need to raise oral questions. We can just summon the officials to come by invoking Article 73. This is not going to be meaningful. As I understand it, the power to summon officials under Article 73 carries special meaning and significance. It cannot be invoked so lightly. Since this afternoon, we have already have 2 motions on Article 73 and 6 more to come. So the public can see clearly whether this is a case of abuse of basic law articles. The discussion is not whether we need water cannon vehicles. I think the focus is on whether we should summon the Commissioner of Police. As I've explained clearly, there's no need to summon the Commissioner of Police to get such simple and straightforward information. The normal procedure of this council will be quite good enough to solicit the information. Therefore, I cannot agree with this motion, because if every time we invoke the basic law to summon the Commissioner, That means that we are bypassing the established procedures of this Council. It's abuse of the procedure and the relevant articles. This would seriously undermine the very good tradition of this Council. With this remark, I oppose the motion. Mr. James To, many pro-establishment camp members have stood up, read out, prepared speeches, talking about the need to purchase water cannon vehicles. And why? You can tell from Mr. Chu Hoi-tik's speech that these members are not speaking on the motion. They just read out something prepared in advance. Mr. Chen has just said that, he's the chairman of the security panel. So he could not adopt the same cliche as other members. He knows that the vehicles have been purchased, so it's not a question of whether we should buy or not. Of course, you can offer comments on the necessity to buy such vehicles. The debate is about whether the Commissioner of Police should be summoned, as suggested, to answer the questions put forth by Mr. Kenneth LEUNG in the motion. And it suggested that there's no need to do this. There are examples of ways to do it. You can raise questions at the security panel. But the problem is the government is not willing to give us the answers. As Mr. Chu Hoi-tik has said, a former member of this council, Mr. Yip Kok-him, said they should have come to explain. But the government just simply won't do this. It's about operational details according to them. We asked the CE, the police, the Secretary for Security. If you put questions to the CE, to the Secretary for Security or to the Commissioner, they would just say that such matters are related to operational details. But if the Commissioner of Police is summoned under the motion, he has to answer the questions unless he can claim some exemption because of public interest considerations, which will have to be certified or confirmed by the CE or by the CS4A. So let's ask this question. Is the disclosure required by Mr. Kenneth LEUNG something that should not be? Is the disclosure required by Mr. Kenneth LEUNG something that cannot be disclosed? If we are talking about operational details, which may affect law enforcement action, well, we have to be careful then. But remember, when we talk about crowd control measures, to put it frankly, you have rules and regulations regarding the use of firearm by police officers. It should be proportionate, for example, under what circumstances you can do this, and under what other circumstances you are not supposed to use the firearm. And the public can then monitor the police conduct. And this is supposed to be a modern community, a democratic one as well. People enjoy powers to maintain law and order, and the powers are exercised for the benefit of the public. It's a social covenant. Everyone should know their own positions.
Now, if the details related to water cannon vehicles can be disclosed as requested by Mr. Kenneth LEUNG, in fact, is same level of information disclosed at police guidelines. We're not talking about operational details. When we visited or when we visit the police headquarters or the police college, when we observe their training, their firearms training, and at the PowerPoint, the projector presents a PowerPoint on under what circumstances a policeman should shoot, when a police baton should be used, and the level of force to be used under different circumstances. Is that operational details? This is exactly what the police should tell the public. The kind of limits they set for themselves, what they are supposed to do, what should and should not be done. The line is to tell the public, President, if the government, let me say, for example, if the government is willing to disclose such information without summoning the CP, there would have been no need for this debate at all. If our pro-establishment colleagues, after weighing the pros and cons, and if they have considered a balance between the rights of the government and members of the public, then perhaps very early on, just a security panel meeting should be convened, and there would have been no need for this motion at all. The government and the pro-establishment members, including chairman of the security panel, should consider this issue from a constitutional perspective. They are still of the view that such information should not be disclosed. Of course, for the public, they may have difficulty in deciding whether such information should be disclosed. However, as members of the public become more and more smarter and smarter, I think we have more and more people out there with common sense and who are enlightened. Information is abundant here. Even if they're not told in Hong Kong, things that happened overseas can easily tell them how a balance should be struck. The public can decide whether the details sought by Mr. Kenneth Leung is too much, and once disclosed, will that affect the police normal operation? The public can act like a jury, and they can decide whether this request is too outrageous, whether we are asking too much. This is not about whether vehicles with water cannons should be purchased, whether the police have enough equipment. President, I trust the judgment of the public, although after major rifts in society, some people may not be able to ponder this issue calmly. And there are some pro-establishment members here who would like to use this excuse of, well, when there are riots, what can they do if there are no water cannon vehicles? And what if people are throwing bricks? And if we do not have a water cannon to separate the police and the demonstrators, what will happen? There is no need to excite members of the public. This is not the crux of this debate. Now, this is not the C.Y. Leung government. Rather, it is Carrie Lam's administration. I hope that Carrie Lam's administration can think twice. Its relationship with civil rights. You have the rights that you have the power you need. You have the equipment that you need. By keeping this information from us, will you be able to muster more trust from the public? Is it really necessary to keep such information confidential? Will you all of a sudden use the water cannon without any warning? Are you going to use it all of a sudden without any prior warning so as to protect this very fragile government? Is that your intention? Carrie Lam is the head of this administration. If she thinks that her administration has more credibility than the previous one, if she thinks that she has more support and trust from the public, well, he or she is capable of opening up the civic square. That means she has more confidence for her own administration. And she has to use the same yardstick to measure her administration. And she has to continue to support or to get the confidence of the public. She should not continue to talk about rifts and riots. Well, if she is going to act as prompted by the pro-establishment camp not to budge an inch, then she shouldn't have opened the civic square at all. Because this is very much an interactive process. Even if I were in power. Now, as Mr. Eddie G said, if Mr. Jeffrey Lam said that some people said that hurling of bricks was peaceful, please name people who make such remarks. Now, if there is such a silly or crazy person in Hong Kong, it doesn't matter, you can name him. But the majority of the people are not thinking like this. By quoting such examples, you just want to widen the rift in society. What is the point of saying such things? Unless you want to maintain this state of distrust between the government and the people. You want to keep this tense situation. You don't want to give a chance of reconciliation between Carrie Lam and the community. I hope the pro-establishment members are not those who want to see this. I believe many pro-establishment members do not think this. I think many of them were glad that Leung was gone because, after all, Carrie Lam is not Leung. I really hope that she is not Leung. Please allow her to exercise her judgment. Ask her to exercise more confidence in the community and to shorten the distance between the government and the people. You should give her more confidence so that the community can be assured, so that even people who insist on or upholding civil rights will understand that everything about the water cannon vehicles is transparent, and they will understand under what circumstances water cannon vehicles will be used as a reasonable level of force. And they would like to know the guidelines and precautions and how to avoid incidents quoted by some members just now. And to prove that bureau directors, department heads, and CP in Carrie Lam's administration would be bold enough to use such equipment when it is necessary, but they should publish their guidelines and precautions so that the public can have confidence that they can exercise their right in peaceful demonstrations. And in between violent demonstrations and peaceful demonstrations, such equipment may be used to gain public's confidence for the demonstration. Now, if you ask the government not to disclose anything, keep them in the dark and call them thugs, and I think if you keep this mentality, you are doing a disservice to Carrie Lam's administration and the central authorities. Dr. Elizabeth Quat, this is a very interesting debate, and we can see how outrageous the pandemics can be. Now, if you ask somebody, have you ever stolen? He said no. And then you said, well, he claimed that he has never stolen anything. So that means he is trying to evade or to hide his offense. In fact, these motions, 6 censure motions and 12 summons motions were introduced to stop us from amending the rules of procedure. One motion will last 6 hours. So if all the motions are dealt with, then it will at least be 10 days before they can be settled. And Mr. Kenneth Leung is very creative. He asks to summons the CP to answer questions related to water cannon vehicles. And James Teo was even more outrageous. He said for sure that the administration was not going to give us information on the water cannon equipment vehicles, and Carrie Lam would not tell us anything about that, and he escalated that to the level of governance by Carrie Lam's administration. Is that the case? I think in the last council, there was a very similar incident. A few members in the council kept saying that the vehicle, that a long distance sounding device would be very frightening. It would harm people. And I took part in that visit organized by the security panel to observe the training for the use of that vehicle after it was delivered. The administration explained the installation and the equipment and how the vehicle could be used, and we listened on site to see how noisy that vehicle could be. So, of course, I cannot speak on behalf of the administration. The secretary is here. Perhaps he can explain to us later whether there was any order from the CE not to disclose any information related to the water cannon vehicles to the public, and then all of a sudden, without any prior warning, the police would use that water cannon to injure people. Is that really true? I think this is very similar to the story I just told you. I think they are just framing the administration. Some members said that such information is very important, and Mr. Kenneth Leung said that such information was for the public to assess the risks. And under some circumstances, the water cannon could be a lethal weapon. And then Mr. Chen Ji-chun said that the water cannons were not like umbrellas. Well, these remarks are very really upsetting. In fact, during the Occupy movement, we could see that umbrellas could be used as weapons and they could hurt policemen. We understand that the water cannon vehicle is not to be used as a lethal weapon. Rather, it is for protection of policemen and members of the public.
so that when there is a big-scale event, it can become a sort of a buffer so that there can be a safe distance between the public and the police. I hope we can all cool down, and so the police can enforce the law effectively. Therefore, I think this motion is quite meaningless. I'm not saying that it's not important to talk about water cannon vehicles, not because of that, but we just don't need to resort to a motion. So we discuss the issue here and so we can get the information. I'm sure at the security panel we'll have the opportunity to get the information to understand the matter. As long as it doesn't affect the future professional operation of the police, I think the administration will give us a lot of information and also to the public for reference. I'm sure legislative councillors will actually be able to take a look at these water cannon vehicles in person. I hope these vehicles will never be used. If there is peace and order in Hong Kong, we don't need to use these vehicles. If we want the public to be safe, the most important thing is for the opposition camp not to incite the public to break the law and to engage in violent charges and also to break the law in other ways. Remember, many policemen were hurt in violent charges. In the last debate, some members asked, was it Mr. Stephen Ho? Do we remember which policeman was hurt in the head by a brick and he fell to the ground? Does anyone care? President, I can tell you that I care a lot about this policeman. We have been keeping in contact. He is Police Sergeant Wong Lok On. He took a long time to recover. He underwent many surgeries, but now he's much better and he has resumed duty. But his neck and his shoulder still ache, and he's still suffering from complications. Therefore, such violent incidents don't only subject the public to risks, but also policemen as well. Therefore, we are not debating whether to purchase water cannon vehicles because they have been purchased. But today we have this motion, and then it has used up a few hours in the council, and then you took the opportunity to take the administration and the CE to task. I think you are going too far, and it goes to show again how filibustering affects the operation of this council and how it takes away the time for us to attend to other more important matters. So I speak in opposition to the motion. Does any other member wish to speak? Secretary for Security. President, on this motion, moved by Mr. Kenneth LEUNG, members spoke differently on the motion, and this is my response. The police have the duty to take legal measures to maintain public order and public safety, and also to prevent any damage to property and life and limb, to prevent public order and public safety from being subject to risk. And when public order is threatened, the police must make a judgment and make professional judgment in order to decide what action to take, including to take crowd dispersal measures and also to use necessary but minimum force to make sure that public order and public safety are not affected. In making use of crowd dispersal measures and force, the police have guidelines and they are trained. When there is a need and when they do not have another choice to complete their legal duty, they must make use of equipment and necessary minimum force. The members are concerned about guidelines for the use of special crowd management vehicles, and they ask us to publish those guidelines. As I said at the outset, special purpose crowd management vehicles have to be shipped to Hong Kong. When they arrive, there will be a series of tests done. Police officers have to undergo training according to the operation of the vehicles. The police are now drafting and formulating the guidelines and also the training to be provided. the police will act with caution. It also depends on the exact tests to be done before the guidelines can be formulated. Since crowd management special purpose vehicles will be subject to operational details when the guidelines are drafted, this will also be related to the police strategy. These cannot be published, or else the effect of the police operation will be affected. But the police will act with a lot of care, and they will cautiously and prudently draft the guidelines and take effective training. Some members were concerned that when overseas countries use these vehicles, injuries were caused and even death was caused. I have to stress that in considering the purchasing and the use of such vehicles, the police have carefully taken reference from overseas countries in dealing with large-scale protests. We looked at France, Germany, Belgium, and also South Korea. We are aware that they have made use of special purpose crowd management vehicles which can eject water, and different water pressure and ways were used in different situations in order to effectively operate the vehicles and to disperse violent crowds. This is to create a safe distance between protesters and policemen in order to reduce the chance of injury to protesters and the police, and it benefits both parties. We must stop acts that hurt public order and public safety. Some members said these vehicles may cause unnecessary injury to protesters. I must point out, when the police use these vehicles, they will be very careful with safety considerations. The water streams ejected can vary, and they are for different purposes. There will be a sound broadcasting system on the vehicles. The police will issue advice, warnings, or other messages to the crowds. Vehicles can also spray dye in order to identify the lawbreakers, and follow-up investigation can be done later. And also, it can eject tear gas in order to disperse violent crowds, so public order can be restored. As I said, the police will formulate strict guidelines and operational guidelines for the use of such vehicles. Before operating these vehicles, all policemen must undergo training for driving and operating these vehicles, and they also have to strictly follow the relevant guidelines in order to minimize the opportunity of injury. When the police, according to the actual situation, must resort to water cannon vehicles in order to disperse crowds, the police will follow these important principles: that they only make use of necessary operation and force in order to achieve the specific purpose, and that mode of operation will stop after the specific purpose is achieved. And when the situation warrants, the police would issue a warning first, and they will warn the crowds about how the vehicles will be used and to what extent. And before using these specialized crowd management vehicles, and where practicable and pragmatic, the crowd would allow the police will allow the crowd to follow the police's orders. I must reiterate that these 3 purchased special purpose crowd management vehicles are for use in riots and also large scale gatherings, especially when violence or violence resulting in physical contact are expected, and so that the police will have another option and to create a safe distance between police and protesters. If participants in the public gatherings are peaceful and they abide by the law, there is no necessity for dispersal and no necessity for the use of force. Some members criticized the administration for circumventing the Finance Committee in order to purchase these special purpose crowd management vehicles. This accusation is not correct. In 2015-16 budget, the police were given $27 million in order to purchase 3 crowd management special purpose vehicles. According to the procedures, any funding of over 10 million must be approved by the Finance Committee of the LegCo so that there will be a commitment. But any funding under $10 million has been the case of authorized or delegation of authority from LegCo to the administration. These vehicles are of the same type and each one of them does not cost more than $10 million. Therefore, the administration has made use of the delegated authority of the FC to create a commitment. And the commitment is included as itemized entries in the budget. The administration is only following established procedures to buy these 3 special purpose crowd management vehicles. Therefore, the criticism was not fair. President, the security panel at this meeting on the 5th of May 2015 discussed how the police handled public gatherings and protests. It discussed the purchase of crowd management special purpose vehicles. And in 2015, 2016, and then in 2017-18 special FC meetings, members asked 28 questions to inquire about the model of such vehicles, the equipment available on them, the purchase procedure, the training manual, and also commissioning dates, etc. The administration has answered all those questions. As to the purchase of these vehicles by the police, it has followed all the established procurement procedures of the government. There is no need to summons the CP to the LegCo to give an account on the purchase of special purpose crowd management vehicles. I would urge members to veto the motion, so I speak. And now Mr. Kenneth Leung to speak, and after Mr. Leung's speech, this debate will come to an end. Thank you, President. I thank members for using about 180 minutes to discuss this motion. If you think it is a waste of time, well, actually, the debate could have been shortened to 20 minutes, and the CP can act according to the motion to come to the LegCo to submit papers, and then that would take 15 minutes. And then we would take time to read the papers, as Mr. Eddie Chu said. We can then discuss this at the security panel, and we can finish the entire debate within 30 minutes. But now we have spent 180 minutes. So which way to do it is more effective and will represent a smaller waste of resources? Well, we don't know. Many establishment camp members spoke, but half of them needed not be responded to. They would read out from scripts. They said we had to buy vehicles, we had to use them, we had to give more equipment for the police, and the police had to maintain law and order, etc., etc. But these 3 special purpose crowd management vehicles, well, it's a long name, isn't it? They have been purchased, and this is not something we want to discuss today. Some members said to me that I could get the information through other avenues. Well, indeed, this is very basic information. When the Security Secretary replied, he said the guidelines are being formulated, so they cannot be submitted. What about number 1 and number 2? The performance, the power, the strength, and possible injury to the human body, that information can be given, can't it? If I had been able to get the information through other avenues, I would not have to invoke Article 73. On the 5th of May 2015, the Security Secretary mentioned that meeting of the Security Panel. I was there. I remember on that day, the Security Bureau, probably it was you, Mr. Lee, you were there at the meeting.
And he said the tendering was not yet done. We didn't know. He didn't know the model, the performance, and so on and so forth. So now we want the Commissioner of Police to provide the information. It's the right time. They have the information. Apart from the third request, they don't have the guidelines. Why can't you make the information in 1 and 2 available? I don't know why. In answering my questions, the Secretary has said that there will be sensitive information related to the deployment of such vehicles. I was talking about the guidelines on the use, and actually the Secretary has already talked about that. Just write it down in the paper. I'm not asking you when you're going to use them, how many will be used, and where the vehicles are stationed. I'm not talking about anything operational. I'm just talking about under what circumstances these special vehicles will be used, special purpose vehicles will be used, and what kind of a warning will be given by the police officers operating such vehicles. In the UK, France, Germany, and South Korea, their guidelines are all the public information. I just don't understand why guidelines in Hong Kong should be kept secret. Because you have to let everyone know what the rules to be applicable, and if the rules are not obeyed, there will be consequences. Mr. Junie Ho said that you just get wet, and if it's summer, you get a cool breeze of water. But we don't understand. We don't know the impact, the damage that can be done to your body if the water is shot at a close distance. I'm not targeting the police or any particular individuals by moving this motion. I just want to get the basic information about the vehicles. As a modern police force, the police should make the information available. It would absolutely have no effect on your deployment and operation. We all know that on the 1st of July, there will be a protest, there will be a rally by people who support democracy. Every year, as a member of IPCC, I will be invited to the police headquarters to see how they conduct their operations. Of course, such information about operation will be sensitive. But for this special crowd management vehicle, they are static information. It's not about what to do on that particular day. When are you going to enter the scene, and then when will they leave? We are not talking about operational information. Such information will be static information. I don't know. I don't want to take up too much of your time because the President is about to adjourn the meeting after I have spoken. I've just spoken for 6 minutes. This motion is not political. It's not against any particular party. I'm just trying to exercise the power of Legislative Council so that the police can give us the information expeditiously. And we are not asking for confidential information or classified information. I hope members can support my motion. I've spoken 6.5 minutes and I'm done. Please support my motion. And I'll put the question to you, and that is a motion moved by Mr. Kenneth LEUNG to be passed. Mr. LEUNG claims the division. The division bell will ring for 5 minutes.
開始表。
Voting begins. Please verify your votes. If there's no question, voting is closed and the result displayed. FC members 21 present, 7 for, 17 against. GC members 21 present, 9 for, 12 against. The question is not agreed by majority, respectively, of each of the two groups of members, that is, those returned by FCs and those returned by GC, to direct election who are present. I declare the motion negative. The meeting is now adjourned until 11 a.m. 24th of January.